season finale with EJ, MARC BERMAN, the Long Island Legends. How are we, gentlemen?
Doing great, CT. It's finally over, but there's still an off season to talk about.
Absolutely. EJ, how are you doing? Holidays now. Must be looking forward to it.
Doing great. Waiting to see what the Easter Bunny will do for us in terms of draft positioning. Hopefully, we get a great Easter egg of a top four, top five, top six pick. Hoping, but most likely not going to happen. But I'm doing great. Great to be on the show again, as always. Good to see you guys.
Absolutely. A lot to cover, and let's get into it. Mark, how can we not start with Leon Rose? He spoke on MSG Networks, the Dolan-owned network media. What were your thoughts on what was said, and also how it was set up and conducted? Because a lot of fans weren't surprised, but I guess the lack of touch, and how it was put together as just put further salt in the wounds at the end of this season.
Oh yeah, it was very disappointing that Leon Rose chose to only talk to the in-house network in an edited interview, and some important topics weren't even discussed. Kemba Walker's name never even came up. I don't know if it was asked and they decided to delete it, but I thought that was very telling that Kemba's name, by the way, he's under contract for next season. But very disappointing that Leon, who has not spoken to the media since mid-September, decided not to address us, the beat writers. In fact, we didn't find out he was going on MSG Network until very close to airtime, which was very disrespectful by the Knicks public relations staff. There's a very poor relationship right now between the Knicks PR staff and the Knicks beat writers. We were not pleased one bit that Leon Rose decided not to talk to us and plans not to talk to us. Maybe on lottery night, we're not sure. But as far as the content, listen, he did answer the questions. He wasn't very specific, but he did emphasize about their young core. He tried to put as positive a spin as possible on the future with the young players. And I thought he was candid about Julius Randle. He said he didn't seem comfortable all season. And even with the Mitchell Robinson situation, he admitted, listen, we'll still talk to him right up until free agency, but gave no guarantees that Mitchell Robinson is coming back. I know EJ might have been watching MSG Network that night. I'm not sure. It was a Sunday night before. So did you have any strong impressions on his performance? I mean, he's not the most candid person in the world, and he's not used to speaking to the media in that type of setting.
Yeah, it was surprising to all of a sudden be watching MSG, and then all of a sudden a Leon Rose interview just magically pops up. It was surprising. It was good to hear his voice. I wish there were more questions. I wish there was more access. Being a lifelong New York fan, in terms of plenty of New York teams, there's more access with other organizations, certain organizations. So, for example, as a Yankees fan, you're never short in terms of information. It just seems as if it's just not a smart move to be so reclusive. It's not a smart move to be so distant, especially because the organization's at a crossroads. So I would love to hear more about the plans from the organization. Knicks fans love the Knicks. If there's anything that's true about the Knicks fans, we love the Knicks and we're passionate. So to not be vocal, to not be present, is disappointing because it creates a level of mistrust of the organization that I think fuels the social media fires that have existed throughout the course of this year. So I really think that it's a disappointing strategy on the part of the Dolan organization, on the part of MSG. It's just not smart business. The more they open up, the more fans will trust them, and the more you'll get buy-in, not just with the organization, but with the team itself as well. So it was a step, but you have to do it more. You have to do it more frequently, and you have to do it with other outlets as well, too.
CT, were you able to see the interview in its entirety out in Australia?
Only on the highlights, the recap as well.
Yeah.
Because I watch on League Pass MSG, but I only tune in when the game begins, so I miss the. I don't even think they would have put that on League Pass anyway. But like
Yeah.
EJ said, and you said, it was a complete surprise. It was a complete shock. And we knew he had to speak at some point. It was building. It was building. We spoke about after the trade deadline, and you said, Mark, you said, "Oh, there's no way Leon's going to speak after the deadline," and that ended up happening. And then I thought maybe okay after the end of the season, but to just speak now, I guess they just wanted to, in typical fashion, wanted to get it out the way so that when the season ends, it's on to the next, and which leads me to the exit interviews as well. I'm hearing there wasn't exactly any exit interviews happening. Can you shed any light on that as well?
Well, the players met briefly with Thibodeau, each player, but I think he told them we'll get more into specifics when you come back in May, from what I'm told. The players have 3 weeks off to unwind, and then they want the young players to come back to start workouts, voluntary workouts. But at that point, Thibodeau is going to go into more detailed analysis on what they need to improve on when they return. I think Thibodeau wanted them to just get away from it all, not think about basketball for a little bit, and he didn't want to put too much into their heads. But he did meet with each player, but again, it was brief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any observations, Mark, from the last game of the season where Obi, Toppin, and IQ just seemed to have almost like a Walt Clyde Frazier, Willis Reed kind of dynamic duo moment just for at least one night?
I mean, listen, it was really the last 5 games where both players were really lighting it up and playing with a lot of joy, and the team was playing with a lot of joy, and Julius Randle was either not at the game or on the bench. And that was very telling on how much fun the Knicks seem to have when Julius is not in the game. And I think he really finally proved to Tom Thibodeau that he can be a very smart player with a high basketball IQ. One of the things that Thibodeau was concerned with Obi was sometimes he made not only mistakes on defense for sure, but even offensively. He wasn't in the right position. And I think also earlier in the season, when Toppin's 3-point field goal percentage was really low, he stopped looking at the basket. He would get the ball at the 3-point line, and I remember he wasn't even looking at the rim. He was just handing the ball off right away. And Tom does not like that at all. He wants his guys to be aggressive and not be afraid to shoot if they're open. And the biggest revelation for Obi was how much he improved from the 3-point line late in the season. That's so huge. He talked about it. If he's not hitting his 3-point shot, defenders aren't coming up to guard him up there, and it's tougher for him than to drive to the basket. So that's a huge part of the game. Thibodeau said, listen, he's always had a good touch, which means his confidence was at an all-time low at some point earlier in the year. So it's a great, great sign. The other great sign is Quickley looking like he can be a playmaker. I mean, he's the reason why he was drafted so late at 25, and even though he was SEC Player of the Year at Kentucky, was scouts didn't know if he had a position. They didn't think he was a point guard because he never passed the ball at Kentucky. So he would be an undersized shooting guard. But now he looks like he could be a legitimate point guard. And if the Knicks can't get a big upgrade at point guard, he might be vying for the starting point guard role when next season occurs. It was a huge development for Immanuel and Obi. The question is, they were playing against some teams who were either waiting for the playoffs or were tanking. So how much credence do you give in those final 10 games?
Yep. Great. Yeah, absolutely. They did go a long way to gaining a lot of trust, and also, boosting their stock around the league as well. Now, I would love these players to remain a New York Knick, but business is business at the end of the day. And Mark and EJ, we know that the New York Knicks young players are always usually undervalued by personnel around the league. And I think this is just a great opportunity for these players to prove that next season they should be a permanent fixture and be playing regular heavy minutes, in my opinion. And now, do you think that is a possibility to happen?
I mean, if EJ wants to address if he thinks Obi and IQ are the real deals, I would love to hear it, because I've always been skeptical about Obi Toppin.
Yeah, you have.
And
Yeah.
I'm still concerned about Obi. IQ, I think, is he's a legitimate rotation player who is a great 3-point shooter. Not always, he's streaky, but he's a great free throw shooter. He draws fouls. There's a lot of things he does. Obi, I'm still concerned about. I mean, I'm still wondering what that meant. And I was wondering if, EJ, if you saw something in those final several games that makes you believe that Obi is the real deal and could be a starting power forward next season.
What I saw from Obi the last few weeks was confidence. I think we saw confidence. I think we saw trust. And I also think it's in relationship to what the team realized it was. When the team thought it was a playoff team, you really couldn't understand what Obi was, because we didn't treat Obi like a real prospect. He got 10 minutes, 12 minutes a night, at certain times, 15 minutes a night. And so, it's pretty evident throughout most of the season that Obi was constantly looking over his shoulders and couldn't play with that level of confidence to really see what he was, because he was in constant fear of getting snapped out of the game, not having the confidence of the coach, feeling torn in terms of what can I actually do to show you my passion for wanting to be here. The last 2 weeks, though, we can debate what the numbers meant, but we can't debate if he doesn't have a position in the league at this point. He's definitely a 1 through 9 player. He's definitely in the rotation. Is he a starting point guard? I mean, is he a starting a power forward? I think it's based upon the other moves that the Knicks make the rest of this offseason. We're really at this really tricky period right now, this really tricky crossroads where we have to decide what we are. 500 teams do that. They're frustrating. And if we're a team that's trying to rebuild around RJ, then I think Obi's your power forward. If we're keeping Julius, then Obi's a trade chip. Obi's just really a trade chip. And I think that's really the decision we have to make. It's almost as if we have two different timelines. We have the RJ timeline and we have the Julius timeline, and they're not the same. And I think Obi's stuck based upon which timeline the front office decides. So that's really my answer. I love Obi. I mean, Obi, one last thing, and it's been a really long answer, but Obi's exciting because he adds an element that the rest of the team doesn't add. He's athletic, he's exciting, he's energetic, he's from New York. I mean, he's just, for all of those reasons, that's why Knicks fans love him. And I think it depends on what we do in terms of other moves, whether or not we should keep Obi. But at this point, I think he's definitely become clearly a valuable trade commodity.
Yeah. Well, some great points there, EJ. And the one thing that Thibodeau had said, when he compared him to Taj Gibson, a young Taj Gibson, it really hit home to me because he loves Taj Gibson. And he was talking about the intangibles that Obi brings to this team. His spirit, his enthusiasm, everyone likes him. He's so friendly with the media too. And when Thibodeau started talking along those lines, I said, wow, he's finally won Thibodeau over. And you made another point where Toppin literally has said on the record twice in the past couple of weeks that earlier in the season, he was afraid if he made one mistake, he'd be pulled. And that's kind of on Thibodeau. Like, he definitely did not give him a long enough rope to make some mistakes. A lot of young players will talk about that. They say, I love this coach because, he lets me play through mistakes. But Thibodeau is not that type of coach and did not let Obi play through mistakes, and partly because he had Julius Randle as a starting power forward. But the Obi situation is just so compelling right now because he went from a player who looked like a potential bust into something much, much different. And I wonder, I'm going to be talking to a bunch of scouts in the next few days about Obi and IQ and what they consider their trade value. If Obi and IQ have upped their trade value as well, maybe they can make some sort of blockbuster for a player who might play for the Utah Jazz right now.
And that's, going back to what EJ said, that's if they decide to keep Randle long term and invest around him and that timeline, because we know how much Tom Thibodeau really wants to push to be a winning team as well. But in terms of Obi, for me, I think that the 3-point shooting was no fluke, because he was a solid free throw shooter coming in. He stroked it at Dayton as well. And that some players do need time to find their stroke in the NBA. So I think that is a skill set that's a swing skill for Obi, to be able to stretch the floor like that. And considering the down year Julius had shooting from three, that's another added dynamic that EJ mentioned that Obi can give us. Now, with that said, we'll pivot to Julius Randle and the timelines that EJ mentioned. Mark, what is your feeling in terms of the likeliness that they will seriously make that move and decide to trade Julius? Or do you think it's not as impending as some people might think it is?
Oh, they'll trade him if they can. I mean, if there's a nice offer on the table, they'll trade him because they have Obi. Thibodeau was pretty clear the other. We were in Washington, I think, when we were asking him about, can you have a Julius Obi situation at the 4-5 in the small ball setup? Because that's really the only way it can coexist, if those two can coexist. And he pretty much said, we give up so much defensively in that alignment, we're basically making a commitment to outscore the other team. And that's not Thibodeau's way of doing things. So I know he's reluctant about it. But I was thinking scenarios like maybe Obi and Julius can split time at power forward, like 15 minutes each or 20 minutes each or 18 minutes each, and then the rest of the time, maybe for 10 minutes, play the 4-5 with the two of them. But it's not an ideal situation, and if they could trade Julius for other pieces in a big package, they will do it. Do other teams consider Julius a big impact player? I think there are teams who do, but he's not been a winning player for most of his career, and for a playoff team, that is a concern.
I think now that you just said that, it kind of gives me the answer in terms of Obi Julius. We have a lot of contracts coming up. You have the Mitch contract decision that's happening this offseason. You have an RJ extension that's happening. And as much as I love basketball, it is a salary cap sport. There's but so much money you can afford to give every single player. And again, I think looking at RJ, looking at Julius, and we've talked about it several times on the show, the redundancy factor. Obi may not be the better player, but he offers something different from Julius. And is it a better fit for RJ? I think we're all certain that RJ, they're going to give him a contract, whether it's the max or not, but RJ's going to be here for a while. So the question really is, who's the better fit next to RJ? Is it Julius? Is it Obi? And I think it's kind of clear it's Obi, because he offers something that's entirely different from what RJ offers and Julius offers.
They're similar players. I mean, Julius is not that much taller than RJ anyway, and they're both left-handed guys who drive hard to the basket and draw double teams and try to spray the ball. One of the things that Thibodeau said about this season, when we were kind of asking him wrap-up questions, he was trying to say, because I asked him about the offense, and I said, listen, the field goal percentages are pretty poor from their overall shooting percentage, the 3-point shooting percentage, not great. And he tried to say that offensively, at least we're doing the right things in terms of driving the ball to the basket. Not every team has players who take it to the basket with such fervor as the Knicks do with Randle and Barrett. But the problem of this season was that neither are great passing out of that. And Thibodeau uses the word spray the ball all the time. Spray the ball. That's his big expression. We need to spray the ball. Draw the double team, sometimes even a triple team, and spray the ball. And neither RJ or Julius did it well enough for the Knicks to be a dynamic offensive team. And he's hoping in those areas the Knicks can improve upon. But in terms of Julius and RJ being a redundancy, it's pretty clear. Neither are very good three-point shooters right now. And Obi adds a different element. He's a terrific, full court player, running the floor, getting everyone energized. And if you have a point guard who can also, play with pace, then you have something really special. Alec Burks was not that point guard. And I hope Thibodeau realizes that, and that's not even a consideration for next season.
Yeah, I think a lot of Knicks fans feel the same way, Mark. And Tom Thibodeau and Mitchell Robinson, been some ups and downs for those two this season. How do you think Tom Thibodeau can learn from this season? Because he's obviously coming back, Mark. And what are some areas that you think Tom Thibodeau could improve upon, coming back next season?
Well, a source did tell me a few days ago that he realizes that he should have played the young players earlier in the season a little more. Maybe McBride, certainly Obi. He relied too much on the veterans. So I'm hoping next season there's more of an open mind. He sounded so enthusiastic about these young players. I don't know if he was just saying it because his bosses want to hear it, but he really did sound excited about all the young guys, from Quentin Grimes to Jericho Sims at center, to Miles, to Obi and Immanuel. I mean, there is a nice group. I mean, the draft class from 2020 and 2021, you got to give Leon some credit. I mean, they're pretty good value picks. I mean, we don't have the star from either class, but they didn't have a very high pick. I mean, number 8 is pretty good, and Obi doesn't look like he'll be an all-star, but he could be a very solid starting player for a long time, potentially. So I think Thibodeau is going to be a little more open-minded next season with the young guys. And listen, it all depends on what they can add in free agency. If they could get a Jalen Brunson to be a playmaker at point guard, obviously Kemba's not coming back. Does Derrick Rose have anything left? I mean, it's kind of scary. He underwent 2 ankle procedures this season. He's 33 years old. He's had a long history of injuries. I mean, could Thibodeau really depend upon him, even though Thibodeau considers Derrick one of his favorite all-time players?
I think that's what's scary is, you just asked the question of how do you go from coach of the year to so many questionable decisions during games and so many moments where you're just like, why are you doing this? Like, for example, I'm sure you've asked the question, but what was Thibodeau's rationale for continuing to start Alec Burks towards the end of the season? Like, was there ever like a stated, this is why I'm doing it, as opposed to seeing what an IQ had, and what was the tipping point for him to realize, okay, IQ here, let's try this?
I mean, I am so baffled that Alec Burks was starting at the end of the season. I wrote a column on 5 things I wanted to see. Even it was just the final 3 games. So it was like, all right, final 3 games, this is what I want to see. And the number one thing was Alec Burks not to even play. They were in Washington, and I wrote that like maybe they could put him in a cab and he could watch the Mets play the Nationals in the season opener. But Alec Burks continued to start. I didn't understand it. The rationale is Thibodeau cares so much about his 1-loss record. He felt that gave him the best chance to win that night. I mean, listen, Immanuel still played a lot of minutes, but I wanted to see him play with the starting unit with Fournier and RJ before he got hurt. It made no sense. Alex should not have played any minutes in the final several games. I think he could be traded this offseason. I think there is some trade value. His contract is not terrible. It's an expiring contract. If this is all about getting a little younger and with a timetable that matches RJ. Maybe they do trade him for a younger player and a draft pick. But it's just the rationale why Thibodeau has RJ Barrett in the game with 19 seconds left in Denver, and the Knicks are down 16 points. And in Orlando, recently we were in Orlando, and they were up 28 points, and all the key players were still in the game. I mean, I can't explain Tom Thibodeau sometimes. I think he's a very, very good coach, but there's some things that drive me crazy, to be frank.
Yep. I think, a lot of fans as well. And, it's now been 2 full seasons of the Thibs experience as well. So Knick fans are feeling, their opinions as well. But we've got a few topics to burn through. But Mark, I quickly want to touch on Mitchell Robinson. He posted a brand new profile photo on Twitter, New York Knicks photo. Are you hearing the sides any closer or entering free agency? Like, what is your feeling towards the Mitchell Robinson thing? And do you feel like the Knicks are open to spending that money to max him out?
Right. Well, Leon was very clear that they want to talk, and they want to talk right up until July 1st. And it's about whether Mitchell Robinson, right now, he survived the season. He stayed healthy. I mean, he really did, and that was the biggest concern. So I think, his agent at the Wasserman Group, Thad Fauscher, knows that his market value will be pretty strong. Do they want to sign a contract extension and not test the waters where they could get even more money? I mean, Mitchell may want to just grab the money right when it's here. I mean, but there's no more risk in terms of getting injured. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I know Mitchell hasn't been thrilled with how he's been used offensively. He feels he deserves, just a little more involvement in the offense beyond just the alley-oop dunk and, grinding out offensive rebounds for putback baskets. But that never happened. And it's going to be interesting. The Knicks can give him $55 million. Mitchell has been underpaid for 4 years. He may just grab that money, but we'll have to see. He may want to change the scenery. I know New Orleans and Dallas are two cities he'd like to play for, but if the money is right there, who knows? He could just grab it.
Yep. And EJ, what are your thoughts on that? And also RJ Barrett, and your thoughts towards his extension and what you feel like he is worth at this point in time to the New York Knicks?
I usually try to approach all these questions very rationally, very logically. And I will just stand my ground on this one position. You can have 2 of the 3 following players. You can have Mitch, you can have RJ, you can have Julius. You can't have all 3 because of the way that the modern game is played. They just crowd the lane too much. So in my perfect world, and I might make some Knicks fans upset, but for me, I would go with RJ and Mitch and try my best and just say thank you to Julius for helping lead to hopefully what's been a great transition for the team. But the only caveat being, though, with Mitch is my prayer is also that we do get an offensive coordinator, that Tom Thibodeau relents and gives in and becomes a little bit more creative offensively. Because, again, what also scares me is that Mitch does do a lot of the dirty work in terms of getting boards, and he did a fantastic job this season of grabbing so many boards, so many offensive boards. And it is kind of sad to not reward someone who works so hard on the glass with some offensive plays. But again, do we know what his offensive capabilities are without a real point guard? So where we are with the organization is that there's some pieces that are here that don't fit. There's some pieces that we need. There's some pieces that are redundant. But I think that if we do get a point guard, I will be happy to have Mitch resign and hopefully also develop his potential a little bit more. So that's my thinking for 2022, 2023.
Yeah, the one thing about Mitchell, and I know he's frustrated that he doesn't get more opportunities, but Thibodeau looks at free throw shooting a lot, and when he decides on someone's offensive role, and Mitchell's free throw shooting really declined this season in the 50% range. He looked a lot less confident at the free throw line. So it's tough that he hasn't progressed. I think his rookie year, he was at 70%. He wasn't a bad free throw shooter. So that's sort of a mental block going on with his free throws. But what Mitchell does well, he does really, really well. But there's still so many holes in his offensive game. I don't think he's ever going to be a three-point shooter, but I'd like to see some mid-range stuff going on, or him driving to the basket if he gets the ball at the elbow. It's just been stagnant for 4 seasons with his offensive role.
Yep. And Mark, your thoughts on RJ Barrett's season? We know you've spoken about his inefficiencies at points, and with the extension looming, he is a building block of this team, and I don't see that changing. I know you dropped a great article, which we'll touch on shortly, about Donovan Mitchell trade and what it would take. But RJ Barrett, you think would have to be included in that kind of deal. But I think New York Knicks fans are probably going to get used to seeing RJ as a Knick for a long, long time.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, if Julius's trade value, if Julius had a better season and, conducted himself in a more professional manner this year, maybe he could be part of a Donovan deal. But I think RJ has to be the centerpiece of that trade. As far as his season, listen, he is such a dynamic offensive player in getting to the basket and drawing a double team. There's few players who can attack like RJ Barrett. He has such a motor, nonstop, no matter the score. It's really amazing to watch what he can do that way. But unfortunately, a lot of times he forces things inside, and that's why his shooting percentages were about 41%. And his three-point shooting was just average. He's got to become a little better from three-point range. His free throw shooting also declined a little. So the efficiency factor was just not there. But the fact that he could command the double team all the time now. I mean, he's on the scouting report. When he's going to the basket, we got to double him and force him to pass. And he should become a better passer. I think he will become a better passer. He's talked about becoming a better passer. So hopefully next season he'll make that next step. And defensively, I know he was guarding the top player on the other team, the top perimeter player, because Reggie Bullock is no longer here. And he did okay, but he was not a defensive stopper. He's not a super athletic player, and that's a concern on defense too, because he doesn't have that lateral quickness on defense. So he's got to be a little better defender. He's an excellent rebounder, especially for a guard, a terrific rebounder for a guard. But as a defensive stopper, he needs to step up a little more in that department. But listen, 21 years old, finishing his 3rd season. He'll get that rookie contract extension, whether it's $181 million or $150 million, who knows? But Scott Perry made the right pick in number 3. Listen, Garland is an all-star, but you can't debate it. It was the right pick by Scott Perry, and a lot of scouts wanted to move down. Believe it or not, some scouts wanted to move down for Cam Reddish all the way, with Atlanta further back. But a good job by Scott Perry in nailing that pick.
I'll throw in another question. I mean, given what we have to decide in terms of RJ and Mitch, and the hopefully the emergence of IQ and Obi, what do you hear is happening in terms of what the Knicks are considering in terms of the draft that's coming up?
I mean, obviously at 12, seeded at 12, they only have a 7.2% chance of getting into the top 4. They like Jaden Ivey. I know that. Definitely heavily on the radar. He's a combo guard from Purdue. Not a supreme playmaker, but I think he'll grow more into that role. They like the kid from Auburn. I think it's Jabari Smith. But they may just be at 12. I mean, the odds are that, they probably won't move up that much, which, some fans were upset that they closed out the season on a little winning streak and cost themselves some percentage points with the ping pong balls. But At 12, we could talk about the Kentucky point guard, Ty. He's a playmaker. But this draft is not well stocked with pure point guards. Unlike that draft with Obi Toppin, where there were a lot of point guards, and they missed on Halliburton, among a few others, even Cole Anthony. But they're at a position at 12 where it's the best player. I mean, I don't think they're going to target a position because the point guard is just not in this draft. But listen, maybe they could get lucky and get up to the in the top 4. New Orleans did it with Zion. It's not unheard of, but that's the problem. It's like a team like Detroit, which is behind them. They're going to have probably a top 4 pick, adding to their young core, and that's why I'm a little skeptical. We talk about the Knicks' young players. The teams ahead of them have very good young players too. And, there are like 10 teams right now in the Eastern Conference ahead of them. And I think, next season, those teams are going to be pretty good too.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. One quick last question. Do you see a fit for Carmelo Anthony returning to New York next season?
Unfortunately, I do. I don't think it's a good move. But I think Carmelo, listen, does he have 1 year left? Probably. And I know he would want to finish it in New York. Could the Knicks use him off the bench? Sure. But, listen, he was with the Lakers, had a decent season, didn't help them win a game. However, what a disaster the Lakers became. But listen, Leon Rose loves him. William Wesley loves him. Carmelo loves New York. It would be a nice story for him to finish his season as a Knickerbocker coming off the bench. I wouldn't rule it out at all.
Yep, I could see that happening, EJ, in a mentor role. But it's been fun, gentlemen. It's been an amazing season. Really appreciate both of you coming on and sharing this with me and all the viewers as well. Mark, we appreciate all the grind that the riders show throughout the season, the early flights, the late nights, covering the team. We really, really appreciate that. And I hope you have a lovely break, rest up, and we'll need you back for a huge season ahead.
Yeah, I'm ready to take some time off now, heading down to Florida. But I appreciate it, CT, EJ. Always a pleasure. You guys do a great job. Great insight. And, anytime you want me back, I'll be back from Florida at some point.
Appreciate you, EJ, and have a lovely break.
Thanks so much, guys. It's been awesome this season. Great work, CT, leading the ship. Mark, fantastic job. Thank you for all the work that you do covering this team that we love so much that it drives us crazy. But we appreciate you guys. Really do.
And
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you to all the viewers and for your support. It means a lot. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the show. And as we roll into the off season, there'll be plenty more coverage coming up, turning focus onto the draft. And let's talk about it more.